Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Behind the Algorithm, where we explore the human and philosophical layers behind technology. From AI ethics to digital culture, we unpack the ideas, biases, and unintended consequences shaping our tech-driven world. In this episode, we interrogate the economy we've never truly counted: care, connection, creativity, relationships, and innovation. These deeply human pursuits shape everything from personal well-being to economic resilience, yet they remain footnotes in our economic models if they show up at all. With AI promising a revolution in productivity, we ask, does it offer a rare opportunity to finally rebuild work around what truly matters, or are we automating ourselves further away from the things that make us most human? To answer these questions, I'm joined by Mackenzie Howe, a serial entrepreneur with a background in investment consulting, who is currently building Atheni.AI, which is a mid-layer infrastructure tool that orchestrates, personalizes, and embeds AI directly into the way people already work, and a platform called Zephyx, which focuses on student education. Before we kick off, do you want to briefly explain what that means and why it's important and what you're working on and why people should know about it?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I think it's important to probably kick off with, while I started out in investment consulting, my kind of area of expertise is around human capital economics, so human economics and the economics of skills. And so when I think about AI, and certainly for Atheni and Zephyx, and the way we've come at this is very much from the human perspective. So what can technology do in tandem with humans, not necessarily instead of them or adjacent to them, but in tandem. So I think, when it comes to Athene, it's really about filling this gap that we have. And there's actually been a gap for kind of decades now between the technology on the one hand, which is capable of many things, it's very powerful in many ways, and on the other side, business and actual real life people in real life jobs picking up that technology and using it for their particular roles or in their particular lives, professional lives, personal lives. And so with something like SaaS, for example, we saw that there was a huge amount of excitement around these kinds of technologies and what they could do for businesses, but not necessarily that gap in the middle of actually making it work for the humans who need to use it. So the stats are kind of horrifying when it comes to SaaS, which is around kind of 70% plus of tools that businesses have invested in just kind of sit there unused. And the reality of it is that it's because we haven't filled that gap between technology and actually making it work for the humans who are supposed to wield these tools effectively. So that's essentially where Athene sits when it comes to AI, is that we're sort of embarking on this AI era, AI revolution that we've all heard about. But what does that actually mean in practice? For businesses, that's Athene. And then Zephyx is around how does that AI kind of translate into the lives of students, whether you're, in secondary school and starting to use ChatGPT for homework, or in university and using it for research purposes. How can you use AI in a way that actually benefits your education and your life and your experience? So that's how I come at it, kind of Athene and Zephyx is from that human capital skills kind of perspective, and also behavioral economics, so very much around the humans in our economy.
Two very timely platforms. There's loads I'd like to dig into there. We do have a set list of questions that we've already been through, but ultimately your platform Athene is about how to introduce technology in tandem with human capital, not instead of human capital. Interesting
Exactly
that 70% of SaaS platforms that what businesses adopt don't get used.
Yeah, exactly that. So the number is something like 120 billion a year is wasted, completely wasted on SaaS platforms. Isn't that
Yeah,
awful?
I've been in the tech space for a really long time, and the gap has always been with implementing new technologies is the change management piece.
Exactly.
So is that a huge bit that you're focusing on now in getting Athene into the hands of users?
Yeah, it's essentially saying, you know what, actually, the tech people have done their jobs. Their job is to produce the technology. But the challenge after that is very much a human challenge. How do you now wield this tool effectively in a business context? And that's very much a human challenge. So it's not really something that really should be sitting with technologists. It's like kind of, asking an electrician to come and do your plumbing. It's not what they specialize in. So when it comes to the actual human challenge, and yes, change management is part of it, but also it's about skills, it's about, well, lots of things that we can delve into today as well, which is kind of organizational behavior, structures, culture, leadership. It kind of spans the whole organization, which is why it's such a challenging thing, really. But that, I think the key point is that what was missing in that SaaS mistake that we don't want to now be repeating with AI is that we just sort of assumed that if we got the technology, we could just plug it and play it, and it would give us all those wonderful benefits we've all heard about productivity gains and everything else. But the reality is that there is this missing gap in the middle, and if we don't get that right, we don't get any of those gains.
You're one of an army, I guess, of individuals that are championing sort of the human element of the future of technology. You're coming at it from a very different angle, but I speak to a lot of technologists who are very keen to put humans at the center, which they almost kind of sit in parallel to those that are like, technology will save the world, it'll do everything for us, productivity and that, but they do leave out the human element. So there's you, and there's a whole glut of other people I could reel off who are very concerned at the human not being at the center of that argument, or the center of that new kind of wave of industrial change. So that brings us on to the first question. So the conversations that we've had before, you've kind of gone into the fact that is a lever that helps us to sort of reshape work around human values. I think you mentioned things like connection, care, creativity, but isn't it like giving a match to an arsonist and hoping they build a fireplace? Like, where's the evidence that our systems that we value are going to be put at the center, are going to be valued by the technocrats of the world?
Well, I think the short answer to that last question is that they're not, unless we make it so. And so that's where the activism part comes in. I think if we sit back and say, oh, it's all going to roll out beautifully and it's going to benefit society, I think that would be naive. And that's for various reasons, partly to do with who those people are who are making decisions, who occupies the seats of power when it comes to AI and technology. And, that is a key part of it, is who is making those decisions, who is creating the AI. It's overwhelmingly kind of a very small sort of tech bro shaped bubble who are making these decisions. And I think our choice is to say, are we going to let this just roll out and let it just sort of happen to us the way we let social media just roll out and happen to us and happen to our children? Or is this something that actually we need more people at the table and a more representative set of people at the table when it comes to making decisions about how AI is actually going to be rolled out in practice to society? And that's across business, it's across education, it's across the whole bit. And so that, I think there is, as you say, a set of people who really see this as, a massively important turning point where we either get involved and make it work for us. Kind of unhelpful media narrative about the hype of AI that I think probably many people, me included, got sick of hearing about, just sick of hearing about AI. And then flipping back the other way, saying, well, actually, we're not really seeing any gains from this. And actually, when you look into the data, when you look into the research, 2 years on, here we are in, mid 2025. So we've had 2 good years of kind of data and research to come out of this. And the reality is businesses are not seeing huge numbers of gains. They're seeing, 3/4 of AI projects don't deliver any return on investment. They don't succeed. They fail at pilot phase between 70 and 80%, depending on the study that you look at. So nobody's actually getting value from AI when it comes to, businesses are throwing a huge amount at it. Everyone's kind of excited about the prospect, but when it comes down to actually seeing results like the ones we've been promised, it actually turns out to be a lot more complex than just kind of buying the right AI tools and plugging them all in. And that's really because of the humans. So when it comes to the kind of back to this initial question around what is it doing to kind of revalue the human aspects of things, it's very disruptive. So, when I talk about the values, the human kind of values, and the way that care and connection and relationships are being revalued as AI comes in, we can take, for example, like a legal or accounting type environment. That's traditionally kind of time-based, and AI sort of rewrites that. So once you get AI in there to kind of do a lot of these kind of contract reviews and a lot of the drudge work that used to take many hours, and the billing was all set up around hours, then that sort of gets very disrupted, because what's left after that? And what's left after the AI has done all the stuff that the AI can do very well and very quickly and more accurately than the humans in most cases, and definitely within the next year or two, it will be fully accurate in those ways, then what is left for value? And the answer is, it's the relationships, it's the humans, it's the face-to-face bit. And that's what a law firm, that's what a senior lawyer can deliver. And actually, these have always been important things, as we all know. Somebody who's operated in investment consulting, or if you've worked in tech, no matter what industry you work in, you see it, that there are people who are very good on the kind of relationships and connecting people and nurturing good client relationships and the counseling side. So legal and accounting becomes less about the kind of technical, which was very time-based, and therefore automatically kind of boosts that value of the humans, the connection, the face-to-face stuff. So I think that's kind of one piece of it, is that it's very disruptive. And when it does come in a meaningful way into business teams, it is kind of rewriting the rules of what skills and what human factors we see as the most valuable. And also those kind of business models, of course, those time-based ones.
I mean, the change management piece is why most tech projects fail within large businesses. Mm-hmm. It's the adoption, it's the inability for staff to want to adopt new technologies, new processes, mm-hmm. new ways of working, because it's not laid out for them as it should be by leadership. They need to own it, mm-hmm. and they need to follow through on their vision, and not just here's a platform, get on and use it. But so interesting that I work in a client facing relationship building role. So it's so interesting mm-hmm. that you perceive the world of work could be changed to focus on more of a relationship based model. Even something, massively. Yeah. I mean, I know that the legal industry has a massive technical aspect to it, as do a lot of technical commercial roles. I work in a commercial role, and working in a tech mm-hmm. company or working in a tech industry, there's a lot of technical knowledge you need to have there. But it's the relationship bit that really enables you to engage with your customers. So it's interesting that mm-hmm. you talk about new, what's the word? There'll be new values that people are looking for when they're going out to hire.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, and I think this point is key, is that when you look at the way things are changing in that, is that for leadership, it's a very difficult place to be in. So as you said, in the past, we've seen these mistakes before with technology. We get the technology, we throw it at people, and then we say, why aren't you using it properly? And maybe it's because they haven't got the skills. Certainly it's because they don't know why they should. Maybe they don't want to, maybe they don't see any gains in it. Certainly with AI, it's kind of scary. So for somebody to just say, oh, here, start using ChatGPT, and oh, here's Zapier, start automating your job away. What assurances do I have? You know, so I think that certainly the leadership teams that we're working with are grappling with, one, this enormous pace of change, which, you know, it's been building for a while now, but it's now at the pace where, you know, technology changing is at this supersonic speed. And the need is for businesses, if you want to be at the front of things, if you want to be using best-in-class tools, if you want to be leveraging everything that's out there and be a leader in your space, then you need to stay on top of it. And that pace of change is just, you know, it's overwhelming. I think we all feel it in a way that it is overwhelming, yeah. But certainly for leaders, having to think through, how do I structure my business in such a way that I can, A, stay on top of this pace of change, and B, adapt to be able to take advantage of these tools that quickly. And these are kinds of things that they're having to think about, because the ones who, I mean, the very small percentage who are actually really using AI effectively, or who are just very good at leveraging technology in general, are finding they are getting these massive productivity gains. And this is the question, and to your question about what is AI going to do to our society or for our society, and will it be in the long run good or bad, is things like, if we take, you know, we often use Carol in marketing because she's like a kind of user profile for Athene. So if you're somebody who is sitting in a marketing team and you're being told use AI, and you use your AI and it says, right, let's automate all of that work. Say you're doing a whole bunch of social media distribution or something, then I'm going to go and automate that. And if I use Zapier or whatever else and I automate that, I've basically automated away half my job. So A, has leadership actually given me some assurances before I do that? If I'm, you know, Carol in marketing, what motivation do I have to actually make that change? So do I have some assurance that once I automate, I'm going to be redirected to something else? And also, once she has done it, what is the leadership decision about what kind of organization they're trying to build? And this is where a lot of leaders are right now, is discovering, okay, we've got that initial stage where we're starting to feel these, you know, productivity benefits. And as they start to see them, then what happens? Does it mean that we freeze hiring? We don't hire anymore? Does it mean that we hire 1 instead of 5 and they need to be really highly AI literate? And how do we interview for that? How do we scan for that? How do we get the right people now that this kind of, you makeup of skills has changed. And on top of that, you've got, what do you actually do with Carol when she's automated half her job away? So do you just cut her and say, now you're a part-time, thanks very much? This is not
Poor
great.
Carol. Poor Carol.
Exactly, poor Carol. Or do you say, hey, Carol, now that you've automated that away and you're not having to do this kind of robotic, I'm going off to post all my social media on various channels, which, by the way, is a bit robotic. It doesn't really take advantage of all of Carol's skills. Once I've outsourced that to my AI instead, maybe Carol can spend a lot more time doing face-to-face stuff with clients. Maybe she can do more events. Maybe she can spend more time building the right relationships, making the right connections. Maybe she can divert that half of her job towards innovative projects, innovating or learning more about technology. So I think these are the kinds of questions that are hugely complex that leaders have to be kind of grappling with. And then obviously over the space of the economy, those decisions on the micro level are going to kind of, multiply, and we're going to see what the effect is on the whole economy, whether it's just, cut jobs and look at that through a very narrow lens, or whether it's a much more kind of systems approach to, okay, let's automate this with AI, but then that means that we can spend more of our time building connections, building relationships, doing the face-to-face stuff, innovating, whatever it is. And so these are the kinds of things that make it just so very complicated, and also come back to that key point that I don't think that there is an answer to the question of whether AI is going to be good or bad for our economy or for our society until we take a stand as people as to what we want it to be. And, the regulators are having to start thinking about, well, they should have probably thought about it before, but they're definitely starting to think now about what those regulations look like. How do we regulate for AI? How do we get involved, not get involved? How much is laissez-faire? How much is...
Yeah.
So they're thinking through these things as well. Meanwhile, everything's just moving on at rapid pace that everyone needs to kind of keep up with. And the reality is our systems are not robust enough to keep up with that pace of change.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about this a lot when I have conversations and they go, well, regulation should have been there first. Unfortunately, we don't live in an economic structure where regulation is there first. It's laissez-faire. It's capitalist economic structure where they just get on with it and you regulate after the fact. Completely get that. And I think most businesses see AI and automation as a savings around OPEX and shareholder value. And they're not really thinking about the broader picture around the implications it has on their staff, wider society, and the employment industry as a whole, or the employment market as a whole, I should say. And you've really framed this in your book as an activist moment, and I've actually written it down here as well. Is this a bit of an optimistic overreach? Because we've discussed technology shifts have distributed power more, haven't distributed power more equitably. They've in fact concentrated it. How do you think we can make this time different? How do you think you can empower workers, society at large, to push back against what is the technology that's thrust on us, which is changing our working environments so dramatically? How can you hold the banner up and get everyone behind you to force this ideological revolution?
Yeah, it's a big job. It's not going to happen without some serious effort and concentration. So I'm not under any illusion that this will happen unless people really, really start to get involved in making it work. And I think that's about communication. It's about the right kind of communication to the whole of society. And I think this is where, so I was at an event a couple of days ago where we had, I forget his name now, but an MP talking about how Britain wants to be an AI leader. We hear lots about how Britain wants to be an AI leader. But when you look at, and this is what the MP, he talked very passionately about it actually, population. And his point is that if you want to consider yourself an AI leader, you need to look at what technology is doing for the 96%. We have a very powerful new set of technologies, and now it's up to us to decide how we're going to apply them to our society, or not, or we don't decide and we just let it roll out the way it's going to roll out, which, to be clear, I'm not a proponent of. So I think you're right. When we look back and we look at different technological revolutions and progressions, often they benefited one group, the powerful group in society. They didn't roll out across the society in a way that was, in the short term or the medium term, potentially in the long term, beneficial. So I think with this one, it's that, first of all, the stakes are very high. So when we think of, for example, the productivity gains of the Industrial Revolution, looking at steam power, for example, delivered like a 18 to 22% productivity gain. That was huge. With AI, we're already seeing 30% productivity gains and projected to be more like 200 or 300%. So the measure of disruption is huge. The stakes are very, very high. And when we think of, this is kind of Econ 101, what is the result of this? When we talk about, shifts in the labor market, if AI is applied effectively in business, we're not just talking about little shifts here and there, little jobs, maybe a few going out here and people having to retrain here. It is a wholesale shift. And that is both terrifying and a brilliant opportunity. But as to which one it'll be, that's where I think it's really up to us. And that's where I think, at the moment, when I look back on those as kind of a, economic historian and looking at it from the perspective of what can we learn from the past, from those technology revolutions that have happened in the past, is that I think if you can do this in a much more conscious way, we have a lot of data, we have a lot of history, we have a lot of information about how this is likely to roll out. So doing it retrospectively, to me, or thinking about it retrospectively, is foolish. And I think on a small scale, we can also see, even with like the social media technologies and everything else, is that if we just kind of roll it out and then try and troubleshoot afterwards, this is a whole generation who is damaged by that approach. And I'm keen for that not to happen. And that's really where I think it takes a lot of people who are not necessarily in the tech industry, because that is quite a small subset who are in positions of power and control when it comes to tech. It comes across to all levels of society. How can people get involved in this? And I think it's important that people do get involved in this, and a diverse set of people are involved in this. I'm not comfortable with the tech bros kind of telling us all how it's all going to be, and we all just pick up that technology by their default settings. Certainly not for my children either. So I think it takes, the reason I go for, I'm not optimistic or pessimistic, more I think we should all get control of this, and it is an activist moment, or we'll kind of pay the price later, is my view.
There's so many different ways I'd like to take that, but how do you see AI incentivizing slowness or depth when our current economic systems reward speed and scale?
By counting it. So we treasure what we measure, and this is kind of a problem with the fact that and this is what some of my book goes into, is around this idea that actually, since about the 90s, our societies have become more and more economized. We want to count everything. Everything is counted. Everything is measurable. And if it's not measurable, then it's valueless. And, we could have a very long conversation just about that. But the reality is that our economic models are often too simplistic to be helpful or fit for purpose. And we can see that. So one nice parallel of this, I think, is we're all aware of kind of sustainable economic growth now, aren't we? We all understand that we're
aware of it, and I think it now sits at the front of every sort of end of year report that companies put out. Their ESG initiatives now sit in the first few pages. It's almost paying lip service to the term more than it is like the actual thing that people believe in or companies believe in.
Yes, and there's an awfully long way to go on that. And I think how we can use it as a parallel here is that when we have narrow economic models, when we have models that just say, input in, output out, more profit is good, less profit is less good. When they're very simple like that, we forget all of the kind of network of inputs and outputs that happen because we're so focused on this specific economic model. And that's particularly relevant when it comes to human capital economics. If we just look at a very narrow economic model, we will miss opportunities and the rest of the picture. So when it comes to, growth, economic growth, when we talked about it without counting environmental damage, it led to us behaving in a certain way economically, didn't it? And we're trying to change that, and it's not really finished, and it's still a work in progress. But we all understand now that missing from the economic model at that time was the externalities. What is it actually doing to the environment, this level of growth? So now we've started to count that, ineffectively, imperfectly, definitely, but we've started to try and count it and bring it into the economic model. Then it becomes part of it, and we think about those things as we're growing. Maybe we should do more of it. But that's a process where we have identified that the economic model was too simplistic. we see that there is a bigger picture involved here, and we've tried to start to bring that into the model so that our growth happens in a different way. And this is the same in this context. So when we look at AI and people, when we look at technology and people, we can either look very simplistically and we can say, let's just use kind of models we have in the past, which are we get skills in and we have output out, and that's it. So let's use AI to automate stuff. That means that our costs will be lower. We can still produce X number of widgets a year, and that's kind of, productivity economics. But the reality is that the picture is much broader than that. And we see that, we have seen that over recent years. There have been moves to try and sort of bring in that bigger picture into the economic model that says, you know what, if we give our people a cycle to work scheme, or we give them a free gym membership, maybe they'll be healthy and they won't take so many sick days. So that's the kind of network effects of kind of human capital economics the picture is much, much broader than just the initial, just that initial kind of simplistic model. And I think that is where we'll see the difference when it comes to AI, is that there will be people, and I'm certainly seeing it, that there are leadership teams who are just looking at AI as a cost-saving exercise. They're just looking at it to become leaner. And then they're having to approach this question, well, what is it I want to build with this company? Is it a one-man unicorn? Am I looking to just build, really though, I don't need any people. I just want to produce widgets and I'm going to get the robots in. And, that's where I want to go with this business. And it starts to become a little bit kind of existential. Okay.
So getting the robots in to build widgets so you can be a one-man unicorn.
Yes, exactly. So you might decide that, yes, that's the way, that's what I want to do. And this is why I think that times are tricky for leadership teams at the moment, because those are the kinds of questions they're having to think about and then also agree on as a group. They're quite existential kind of questions, right, for them to be thinking about. And then beyond that is, okay, maybe if that's not where we want to go, what do I actually want to be building? What if I automated, maybe we could use technology, we get 30, 40, 50% productivity gains from that. Am I going to lay off half my people? Am I going to freeze hiring? Or am I going to redirect these resources to innovation? So that might not be immediate payback. And if you look at kind of short-term economics, your unit cost is going to be, everything's going to stay the same, except you have this enormous movement in R&D or innovation. So what does that do to your business in the longer term? Or you spend an awful lot, like we said before, you spend an awful lot more time talking to your clients, nurturing relationships, going out and holding face-to-face events, doing research, understanding your customers or your clients better. So these are all ways that you can build, competitive advantage, and not necessarily, it's not a kind of fait accompli that you use AI to just cut jobs. That's up for leadership teams are going to have to think this through. And there's also going to need to be some guidance. So in answer to this, I feel like, yes, there is space for guidance, I think. And the government is often asking questions like, how far should we be advising on this? How far should we be getting out talking about how, AI should be leveraged and should be brought into businesses? And how far should they just leave the market forces to do what they're going to do? So we'll see. I don't know. The answer is still out there somewhere. We're not sure how the government will behave in this. They might go, in the States, it's very much just let it roll out and let's let the market forces do their thing. I think there is room for some advice, some guidance and some leadership on this in a way that would be better for society. But I think leaders, certainly from our perspective, we see them looking for answers on this, looking for guidance.
I think market forces will move the hand of the leadership within some of the bigger organizations to see productivity gains as a way to cut staff and a way to increase shareholder value. Mm-hmm. But I think what you're suggesting is that we're on sort of an evolutionary track to achieve new economic models. And we sort of, I jokingly alluded to the fact that those sort of ESG credentials that are put at the front of end of year reports now for companies are more of a nod to say we're sustainable, we're doing the right thing, aren't we good? But actually, you then went on to talk about what we treasure, we measure. Maybe that is a slight shift. We only have at best 80 years in our life, but thinking much longer term, we want to see impact, we want to see change now within our lifetime, but actually in the next 100 to 200 years, God willing, the species still exists, the the planet hasn't totally given up on us, we might see a shift to new economic models that actually take into consideration those externalities, those variables that have that are being impacted now. Or you talked about how original economic models, we ignored the impact on the planet, and now that's being taken into consideration. We will start to bake in new models which look at the bigger picture.
I hope so. And one thing I always like to use when it comes to human capital economics in particular, one example that I think is a really good one of what chaos ensues when you have pitifully simplistic economic models. So one of them is that in about the 1950s, they came up with, in the Chicago School of very neoclassical economics, it was the time of, Friedman, Theodore Schultz came up with this theory of human capital economics. And in that theory, which went on to become sort of the bedrock of the work that was done on, by Kuznets on GDP, GNP, it's everywhere. It underpins everything. All the societies that we live in sit on this kind of human capital theory that he and his contemporaries came up with. And being white males as they were, surrounded by other white males, their economic model started from age 18. So, for example, their model was around how humans behave as an economic input. So as we have skills in the economy, someone might, as an 18-year-old, you go to university, you make a decision to study X or get X qualification, and that qualification or that set of skills becomes like your human capital. And then you go out on the labor market and you offer your skills up on the labor market, and then you are paid accordingly. And if we think of, these kinds of models like creating, I don't know, like the model of, say, like a t-shirt factory, again, you have the fabric, you've got the t-shirt material, you've got the labor that happens behind the scenes in, cutting up that fabric and making it into t-shirt shapes. And then you ship it out to the front. And then at the front of the shop, you go and you sell those t-shirts. And you've got the people who work in the store, and you've got your customers who pay for the t-shirts. And if we think of this in kind of the human capital side of things, what we saw was that because they were created by a very small subset of men in the 90s, that model discounted everything that happened to actually produce the human capital in the first place. And by that, I mean women actually having the babies and taking them from zero to an economic participant at age 18 plus. That kind of cost of production was just completely left out of the model. So the ramifications of this is basically like saying in the t-shirt model, we're just not really going to count the price of the fabric in the back. We're just going to start counting from the point that we have the t-shirt and we go and sell it in the front of the store. And that's essentially what we did with human capital theory as well. So what that meant was that as our societies became more and more economically based, and as they are now, if you can't measure it, if it's not economic, it doesn't exist, that the actual production of human capital is not an economically productive activity because it's not counted. And the chaos that ensues from that is that it's very difficult now, and you see it everywhere, which is, governments trying to figure out, how do we now try to count this? How do we factor in parental leave? How do we pay maternity pay? How do we get our heads round how to provide childcare so that the women can go and work in the economy? So these are all examples like the environmental one as well. When you leave out vital chunks out of the economic models and you use those in order to create policy and in order to organize your society around them, you later run into trouble. And I think economics is an evolving thing. And my hope and my goal is that economic models will start to become broader and more sophisticated. And I think that's with AI, that's in the workplace, that's human capital in general, in skills, that we will stop thinking in so much of a siloed way when it comes to economic models and start to think broader about the connections in that kind of systems way, rather than in the narrow way that we've been in.
That's fascinating, bringing more variables into the human capital model, because ultimately we have a false equation at the moment.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. So can you give or name a current institutional government that you think is genuinely valuing the invisible economy of which you talk about? I think that's what you described it to me, that care, creativity, relationship, those variables that go into counting the human capital model that isn't quite there. Are there any institutions or governments you think that are factoring that in?
I think there are two things. So first of all, there's on the kind of the care and the invisible economy. And I think there are some countries who are doing some good stuff in this. And I think we're all getting better as a whole, but we haven't got to the point of really valuing some of this stuff. But the Nordic economies are starting to. So they're doing a lot on really understanding the power of, the family in order to mobilize the women to be able to work in the economy and then produce value and pay tax. And actually there is an economic, yes, it's about also fairness and justice, but it's also an economic, something that makes sense from an economic perspective when women want to work, to be able to actually give them the facility to work. And that there is this invisible care economy that's like 1.2 trillion in the UK is what it's worth, is the amount of work that's going on unpaid in order to support the economy that's actually producing the GDP, the GNP that we all count. So in order for those people to go out and create the value that they do in the economy every day, there is a 1.2 trillion layer of care economy that's happening unpaid underneath it, that's invisible and uncounted. And the Nordic countries are probably the best example of the ones who are actually starting to count this care economy and factor it into their economic models to say, if we count that care that's being done, then actually we can start to get a much clearer picture of what true economic growth or what the potential economic growth is. So they're quite a good one. And then I think the second point is around AI in particular. So I see AI and actually technology, not just AI, because AI is kind of blending into everything else, but technology and even robotics as a massive opportunity for us to finally start counting some of this stuff. So I, for one, for example, am really excited about the idea of two things: household robots. So the fact that there can be robots who work in our house and start to do some of that care economy work, the 6 hours a day that mostly women do on top of their full-time jobs, at least 6 hours, average 6 hours. So once robots start taking on some of this, then we will start to have to think, what is the value? Because what will we pay for a robot? And I can tell you, I would pay a lot for a robot to come and do my laundry and all my 3 kids' laundry and clean my house. But once you start to pay for those, they become monetized, right? And then we start to see what is the value of that stuff that we've all been doing for free. But actually, we can start to mobilize that. So I'm really excited about that. And also self-driving vehicles. So self-driving vehicles are, that's awesome. Everyone thinks, oh, isn't it cool? You go to San Francisco and get in a Waymo and you're like, wow, take a picture. But actually, I was in a Waymo in San Francisco and there was only one thought in my mind. And it was, how is this going to affect our economy when all the parents of the world have the option not to structure their day around the school pickup and drop off if they want to?
Yes.
It's massive. It's absolutely massive. And I think these are the kinds of things that we think, if we think a little bit more laterally about economics, about how this might affect that over there, we can actually start to see somebody who's doing a cost benefit analysis of whether we should have autonomous vehicles. They thought about this. And I think often they haven't, is the answer. And the same with robotics, the same with all of it. So I think it's this idea of thinking much more broadly. But on the AI point, I would point to Singapore as one of the countries who's really got a handle on thinking much more broadly across the economy about how AI and technology can be applied for good. And they're doing it in a much more systematic way. They're getting together, boards, their grant funding. They're really organizing industry leaders, government together to say, how can we do this? How can we manage this revolution in a way that's actually going to benefit our society? And that takes thought. It takes planning. And it's not just going to happen on its own.
That's so interesting. I definitely not thought about the impact self-driving cars could have on the school pickup run. I don't have kids, my partner does. And when her kids had to go to school, it was a massive part of her day. So one of the questions I was going to ask you before, and I think you've answered it in this answer, was on how do you incentivize players in the economy, so big corporates, to sort of uncover new models. And the way that you do it is by incentivizing them to see the value, see the commercial value. And you've just answered it in that question. If you want to uncover new models, create an environment where you can charge for it. So having a robot in the house to do the laundry, to do dinners, to do whatever it is that you need to do to look after your kids, then exposes that 1.2 trillion that you talked about as a market opportunity. then it's valued, then it's measured, then we treasure it, but we treasure it from an economic standpoint. So it then becomes something that gets more attention, gets more focus, as with the school run. I think that's fascinating. And I think that, I speak to a lot of people on the sort of more ideologically naive side of wanting to do something about the rise of AI. But this actually frames it in a way where you want to make change. So how do you present that change back to the organizations that are going to have the biggest incentive to make the change, which is creating an economy around it and being able to charge for it, and then saying, look, this is the value you could gain from it. Now, what's the cost benefit analysis there?
Exactly.
I think that's fantastic. Is that going to come out in your book, the whole notion of this new methodology?
Yes, exactly that. Yes. So it's centered on women, because I really feel quite strongly, and this is one thing I should actually say, is that AI is wide reaching across silos, across original sort of buckets of expertise. So it reaches into everything. And that's one of the challenges, is that for leaders, for example, who are thinking through, how do I start to leverage AI, or how do I effectively kind of manage this process and this transition? They're having to think across technology. What do they do about hiring practices? What do they do about appraisals? What do they do about their, corporate reputation? So it spans all of these areas. And so they're talking a lot about how AI really forces this idea of kind of T-shaped thinking, which is that you have your depth of domain expertise, you have your bit that you really know very well, and we've had that for many years, that kind of technical expertise, which we've really focused on in the past. But now you have this layer across the top, which is the kind of AI technology bit, where you have to be literate enough and to know enough about technology, about how to use it for your domain expertise. So we all kind of need to become sort of T-shaped, and it reaches into everything. And this is problematic when you are used to the idea that we all stay in our lane. We all have our little area of expertise, and we stay in our depth of expertise. So that's how AI is really kind of challenging things, is it's really forcing us to think in this kind of systems way. And something that I kind of talk a little bit about in the book, and that's what kicks it off with the kind of women's side of things, is that women traditionally have, concentrated in women are these skills of, in particular, systems thinking and pattern recognition. Conversely, there are very few women operating in seats of power in AI. And there are lots of organizations trying to do something about that. There are lots of kind of, industry body, She Shapes AI, lots of them who are saying, AI is our future. And if all of the seats of power in AI are occupied by one type of person, then that's not reflective. That's not going to create systems that are reflective of what society needs or wants. So that's where I kind of start. And that's why I think it's important to think about who is occupying those seats. Because if we accept that, if we've got a government who thinks that AI is, Britain's going to be an AI tech leader of the world, and, we have this big opportunity or this big risk, but we're standing on the precipice of something big, who should be in that room about how AI rolls out? And I think that's something that is really kind of key to think through. And that's how I kind of kick off in the book. But exactly that, it goes into, how do we start thinking in this much more systems way when it comes to economics, and start doing much more robust cost benefit analyses rather than the kind of narrow ones that have led us down not so good paths in the past.
When will your book be launched?
Hopefully by the end of the year. Let you know how it goes.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back on to talk more about the book once I've had the chance to read it. Now, final question. What's one takeaway you'd like to leave the audience with, and who would you like to invite onto the podcast next?
Okay, one thing I would like to leave the audience with. AI and technology is something everybody needs to be involved in. And I know that's a bit divisive. A lot of people say, I don't want anything to do with it. I'm not techie, or that's just not I'm not interested. I don't like it. I think it's really important when we consider that this is kind of where our nation, where our economy is going, is an AI powered future, that we all think about what that means for us, and that we all have a voice to get involved. So I think the fact that you're not techie, or you're not someone who considers themselves, an AI person, that you see that this applies to you as much as it does to anyone else. And think of it more like a car. You don't have to be a mechanic to own a car, drive a car, care about a car, arrange your life around having a car. But you do need a driver's license. You do need to kind of know how the thing works. And I think that is the key kind of takeaway point. If you feel that you're kind of excluded from the world of AI and technology, please know that you're not, and you need to get involved.
And who would you like to listen to on this podcast? Who would you like to invite to it?
I like Dr. Julia Stem from She Shapes AI. She's got a lot of really good stuff to say. She's very smart, she's very switched on, and she comes at it from a slightly different angle, but she's very kind of concerned and energetic when it comes to the idea of how can AI work for society.
I'll be sure to reach out to her. Thank you so much for joining us, Mackenzie.
No worries. Thanks for having me.